Bonjour, bonjour à tous. Bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. Je suis Boris Proulx, président de la tribune de la presse parlementaire et bienvenue au Théâtre national de la presse. We have this morning the Honorable Michelle Rempel Garner, Conservative Shadow Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. If you're attending here in person, please be mindful of where you put your little earpiece in order not to put it too close to the microphone, not to create hurtful audio feedback for our interpreters. As usual, we'll go to brief remarks, and after that, a question period on the one question, one follow-up basis. On that, Shadow Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you. 2 weeks ago in this very room, I listed numerous cases of non-citizens convicted of serious crimes in Canada who received lenient sentences specifically to avoid deportation. Cases that have continued to pile up since the House rose in June. Those examples followed dozens of similar cases which Conservatives raised in the House over the past year. 2 weeks ago, I once again called on the Liberal government to end this practice, and once again they took no action. And, no surprise, more egregious cases have since emerged that underscore the urgent need for change. For example, on August 15th, it was reported that an Indian national in Canada on a study permit was convicted of theft and 8 counts of fraud, and is now asking a judge for an absolute or conditional discharge to avoid a criminal record that immigration lawyers warned would almost certainly lead to his deportation. And on August 20th, it was reported that an Ontario judge reduced the sentence of a non-citizen from Ecuador who was convicted of sexual assault causing bodily harm, even though the defense had agreed that the original 5-year term was appropriate. Citing near certain deportation that would follow, the judge stated that the conviction will have devastating immigration consequences and lowered the sentence. There is ample evidence to suggest that defense lawyers are routinely using immigration status as an argument for their clients to get away with the consequences of committing serious crimes. That is an anti-Canadian practice, and it must be stopped. It's worth noting that Canadian courts actually said this about this practice. In the Pham decision, the Supreme Court ruling, which opened the door to this disgusting practice, the court explicitly stated that the consideration of immigration status does not constitute a charter right, a remedy, or a charter breach. In fact, the ruling did not mention the charter at all. Furthermore, it made clear that the flexibility of Canada's sentencing process must not be misused by imposing inappropriate or artificial sentences, which clearly now is the rule and not the exception. Doing so would circumvent Parliament's will, as reflected in long-standing immigration law, which requires that a non-citizen convicted of a serious crime in Canada be deported. Said differently, by not closing the loophole in the law that allows for this practice, the Liberal government has enabled lawyers to help non-citizens avoid the consequences for law that has existed for decades. And that law is there for a reason. Giving non-citizens who have been convicted of serious crimes in Canada lenient sentences in order to avoid deportation creates a two-tier justice system where Canadian citizens are given harsher sentences than non-citizens who broke our laws. Not only is this hostile to the common good, it sends a clear and dangerous message to non-citizens across Canada that the federal government feels that it is acceptable to break our laws with impunity, because even those who commit serious crimes like sexual assault can remain in our country, cities, and communities. It is the government's fundamental duty to ensure that no non-citizen is allowed to enter Canada and enjoy its privileges and benefits without fully accepting the responsibilities that come with living here. I shouldn't have to get up in the House of Commons over and over and over and sit here in front of you over and over and over with story after story of two-tier justice. Non-citizens convicted of serious crimes in Canada should be punished and deported, period. How many more reports of serious crimes like sexual assault being reported with a lenient sentence will it take for our Prime Minister to act? Prime Minister Mark Carney and his government should be able to say through their actions, if you are a guest in Canada and you are convicted of a serious crime like sexual assault, there is no possible reason you should be allowed to stay here. Letting certain people commit crimes with impunity makes Canada unsafe, leading to a society that is less trusting to everybody, including immigrants the vast majority of people who come to the country, by the way, who work hard and play by the rules. I implore Prime Minister Mark Carney to take action. It is irresponsible that he hasn't. Our Conservative Bill C-220 would have ensured that non-citizens convicted of serious crimes are punished and deported. It would have ended the two-tier justice system and brought much-needed fairness and balance in criminal sentencing. Prime Minister Mark Carney and his Liberal caucus, instead of adopting this common-sense solution, chose again to vote against it. I implore the Prime Minister to reverse his position on this issue and restore fairness and order to Canada's justice and immigration systems. Canada's Conservatives stand ready and willing to work collaboratively to get a policy like this passed, as long as the government is willing to fix this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Merci. We'll now go to the question period. We'll first start in the room, and then we'll go on Zoom. So if you're attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this time. Hand it over to you after a question in person. So we'll start with David, CBC.
Hi, good morning. My question is not on the topic of immigration, but I'm hoping that you would indulge me. It's about tariffs. One of the big sticking points in last week's negotiations with the U.S. seemed to be tariffs on autos. Mm-hmm. Your party is pushing the government to get back to the table and continue negotiations. Are concessions on Canadian autos something the Conservatives would be willing to live with?
Well, I'm in an indulgent mood this morning, and I'm just going to ask, there's an echo in the earpiece, so if that could just be dealt with. So it's a good question, but it's difficult for me to answer right now. And it's difficult for Canadians who are being asked to bear the cost of either reciprocal tariffs or any other measures related to the trade dispute, because we don't understand what the details of the deal that was put on the table. We don't understand what those details were, why the government walked away. So this is why my party's been asking for those details to be released. And the question that you raise is one that probably should be debated in Parliament, given its gravity, right? So this is why we are asking for Parliament to be recalled, including parliamentary committees, so that we can get trade officials to the table to answer some of these questions. I'm sure the media would be appreciative of something like that too. And then to your point about broader counter tariffs, yesterday, I think it's worth noting that our party leader, Pierre Poilievre, put out a call to the Prime Minister to release any costing analysis. First of all, we want to know if the government has done a detailed costing analysis of potential retaliatory tariffs, so that Canadians can understand what that means for them. You know, you talk about the auto sector. There's a lot of people in the auto sector who are very concerned about their jobs right now. They're concerned about what this means going forward. Is the government going to go back to the table? Why did they walk away? How are these retaliatory tariffs going to affect them? But it's not just one sector. It's almost every sector in Canada, and it's every Canadian who is going to the grocery store and going, how is this going to impact my grocery bill? Canadians need to be able to plan. So this is why we're asking for that cost impact analysis to be released. And the other thing that we've been advocating for is, look, we can't control what the Americans are going to do, but we can control what we can do within this country. So we've been putting forward elements of an economic action plan that we think would, we know would strengthen the Canadian economy and give us more leverage. Things like green lighting projects awaiting federal permits, scrapping federal gas taxes until Canada Day, and a bunch of other common sense measures that would clear the way for investment and job creation in Canada, no matter what's happening with any trade deal. So, I guess just too long didn't read it on that answer is we need more information. And it's not just members of Parliament, it's every Canadian needs to understand where the government is at on that.
And how do you respond to, I guess, the government's response that, if they put everything out in public, that would compromise negotiations. The Americans are also saying something similar, and they're, very careful with what they share. Is there a way you think where the government can meet opposition parties halfway, possibly not, putting the deal publicly out there, but maybe sharing it within a committee or something like that? Or?
I think that's a mischaracterization of what we've been asking for, right? I think my party leader was out and answered a similar question this week where he said, look, The Americans know what was on the table, right? Because they were sitting across the table from our trade negotiators. They know, everybody's talking about what was in that final deal that everybody walked away from, right? So the Americans know, our trade negotiators know, that's not a trade secret anymore. What I think we're recalling Parliament, why we're wanting to recall Parliament, is to bring, as you said, some of these officials, for example, to different parliamentary committees to get a sense of why they walked away. There's been a lot of speculation in the media and different versions of different stories, and that's not helpful to industry who are trying to plan, investments or strategy going forward. That trickles down into planning for jobs, and as I mentioned, it also affects whether or not, Canadians need to be able to judge whether the measures that the government are proposing, if it's addressing what's in that deal. We don't know. So I hate being in that situation. There's 338 members of Parliament. We represent over, 40 million Canadians. And the Prime Minister is going to Europe to address the European Parliament. Maybe he could address the Canadian Parliament first. Maybe we could get some of those details. So I think that that's a prudent, common sense way for it, and we're going to continue to push for it.
We'll go to David, Canadian Press.
There we go. Now that's on. Good morning. Yes, going back to what you were talking about today. Are you aware of any studies or research looking at how often judges are giving more lenient sentences to avoid negative immigration outcomes for people? After your last press conference, was trying to find, is there a trend? Is there anything going up, down? Because the anecdotes are there, but how does it compare to other cases? Most recent I could find was 2019, which all things considered, that's 7 years ago now, bit out of date. So, are you aware of just anything suggesting that this is a growing issue, or are we still working mostly with anecdotes?
Well, there's been dozens of reports that I've raised in the House of Commons. We had the immigration minister in the House of Commons for several hours prior to the House rising, and I raised many different cases. So, I would just refer you to that. The links to those cases are in there. I've also written about this issue extensively. And in debate in the House of Commons on the bill that I mentioned, which was my private member's bill, we also raised many statements. I also released many statements to the media with links to other cases, and the statement you'll be receiving on this has the two cases linked. There was cases linked last week. But the issue of tracking that you mentioned is a good one. The criminal justice system is very opaque on listing convictions based on things like citizenship status, for example. But you don't just have to take my word for it. There was I believe it was a Montreal area judge that was so furious with this practice, judge or a lawyer, former judge. He was the one who called these candy sentences, right? I have also heard, I've had lawyers phone me off the record and say, look, I can't come out, I can't do this because it would be bad for my practice. But this is happening all the time. It's a frequent posture that defense attorneys will take in criminal convictions or criminal cases where non-citizens are involved. And that's why in my remarks, I referred back to the original Supreme Court ruling, which said that the ruling should not undermine the original will of Parliament, which is in the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, which states that if somebody, a non-citizen, is convicted of a serious crime in Canada, they must be deported. So the reality is that there are judges, there are other actors in the judicial system that are abusing the spirit of what was in that ruling that was noted by that judge or former judge that I just mentioned. And, it's case after case. There's a case every week. I mean, that's why I'm here again. There's no charter implication. The Supreme Court ruling talked about that. So I just don't understand why the Liberal government is letting this happen. And I just want to close with this. The reason why it's so important to address this issue is that I am very concerned about law-abiding people who come to Canada, who immigrate to Canada, play by the rules, they work hard, who are being painted with the same brush as other people that are not doing that because there's not consistency in the sentencing. And there's also a question of fairness. Why should a non-citizen, by virtue of their citizenship status, get a lighter sentence than a citizen for the same crime? That makes no sense. So there's no reason why they can't fix this. It's not just me calling for this. I think that it's ridiculous that I'm sitting here week after week, question period after question period, month after month, with story after story after story after story. So just fix it. So, one case, I guess the short answer to your question is one case is too many. One case is too many. Why is this happening? Thank you.
Just to follow up, I was talking with the head of the C.D. Howe Institute's Immigration Advisory Council just about Prime Minister Carney's comments from, I guess, a month ago at this point, saying immigration is back under control. One of her critiques of that comment is saying that there's still not enough transparency around what exactly is the size of the temporary resident population, especially given the lack of tracking at this point of people, are they leaving when their visas expired? But one other thing that she raised was seeing that the 5% target, saying that should be seen as the ceiling, not the floor, for where their temporary resident population should be. So just want to get your thoughts on that. Like, what do you think of that 5% target of the temporary resident population that the government has right now, and should that be lower? Should that, is that acceptable? Like, where do you stand there?
Well, let's start with the opening statement that you made, which is Mark Carney's statement on Canada's immigration system is under control. I don't think anybody would agree with that. That was, I could use a different word for what it was, but it was a bit of a stretch. How about we say that? How about we say it was slightly detached from the truth? Here are some of the metrics. You were talking about the temporary resident population. That number, right, overall immigration levels should be matched to Canada's ability to provide jobs, healthcare, and housing to everybody, right? And what ended up happening with the temporary resident population over the last several years under the Liberal government, under the man who's now the Justice Minister, by the way, and is now responsible for this policy that I talked about today. The Liberals granted permits to, over 1 million foreign students, hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of temporary foreign workers, and we have jobs crises and high unemployment rates in a lot of parts of the country, right? And that's not fair to anybody. It's not fair to somebody who came to Canada to build a better life. It's not fair to somebody here kids that are out of jobs today. So, what is the right number? The right number is set the immigration levels in accordance with Canada's ability to house, employ, and provide health care to people coming into the country. And then the other thing that needs to be considered right now is it's not just about future levels. The levels are still very high. To your point, it was the CBC who reported last year that in 2026, there would be nearly 2 million people on expired or expiring temporary visas. And really, the government has no plan to remove those persons. So how are those persons factoring into the fact that they're still issuing hundreds of thousands of temporary permits? It's irresponsible. And the last thing I'll say is on setting levels. We had testimony from the immigration minister that said that she didn't even consult the provinces on healthcare capacity before that. They didn't consult the provinces on capacity to integrate non-speakers of either of Canada's official languages into primary education systems. How is that fair to anybody? How does that help social cohesion? How does that manage our pluralism? So, in all of those aspects, and in the message that I brought forward today, the need to change or close the loophole which allows non-citizens convicted of serious crime in Canada to avoid deportation through lenient sentencing, that's not an immigration system that's under control. And, shame on the Prime Minister for saying that. It ruins his credibility.
Thank you, and I'll go on Zoom. If you're attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand function at this time. I see one reporter's hand. Walid Tamtam, Western Standard. Go ahead.
Good morning, Michelle. Can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. This is obviously not the first time you brought up this issue. So, on terms of immigration, there is a sentiment growing in the Canadian public wishing for reform, temporary foreign workers, the overall amount of immigration, and the situation with the unknown amount of people with expired visas who may or may not be leaving the country according to their deadlines. So, what do you think, specifically on the what you call the two-tier justice system issue with immigration status? What do you think is the political appetite or prerequisites needed to get the government on board with your side and actually implementing any changes on this specific file, which comes more from a justice angle than it does purely from immigration?
What I think is happening, and the reason why I've called and Conservatives have called for the resignation of the Justice Minister and the Immigration Minister over this issue, is that you have the current Justice Minister, Sean Fraser, was the Immigration Minister who oversaw the creation of an abject dumpster fire in Canada's immigration system, promoted into the Justice Ministry, and a arguably incompetent current Immigration Minister not failing or failing to see the need to address the issue that you just mentioned, which is the issue of non-citizens convicted of serious crime getting lenient sentences to avoid deportation. I did their job for them this year. I wrote a one-line private member's bill that would have added a line to the criminal code, which would prohibit that practice in the justice system. It would have been in alignment with the Supreme Court ruling, and it would have, because the Supreme Court ruling said that the charter rights weren't impacted. So there's literally no reason why the government can't do this. I think it's partisanship, I think it's incompetency, and I think it's just willful blindness to an issue that is across the political spectrum seen as ridiculous. Look, regardless of how somebody votes, we all care about Canada's pluralism. And that, one of the foundational responsibilities of being in this country is respecting the rule of law. So if the government, through its actions and its votes on matters like this, say it's okay for a non-citizen to break the law because the judge is going to give them a lenient sentence in many cases to avoid deportation, I mean, that's not respecting the will of Parliament. It's not upholding the rule of law. I implore Prime Minister Carney, don't make me come to this room again. Don't make me raise case after case in the House of Commons. This is a one-line bill that we could pass in 5 minutes in the House of Commons. Let's just get it done. And I think that would, to the point that, if Mark Carney wants to claim that he's getting the immigration system under control, I mean, he has to address this issue.
Follow up, Walid?
A little bit over a month ago, yes, please, thank you. A little bit over a month ago, I interviewed the High Commissioner of India, who's been very active on media outlets in Canada, speaking about this very issue of immigration fraud in Canada, Indian international students and whatnot, given many of them are coming from his country and carrying his passports or his country's government's passports. Do you believe, given you raised also the Bishnell gang issue, how Canada's immigration system is vulnerable to these kinds of actors and groups and criminal networks, do you believe that there is any state involvement with abusing or encouraging the abuse of this process? Because ultimately, these criminals who do come over into Canada are carrying government passports and government documents of another government that had proved their ability to travel in the first place before Canada eventually let them in.
Well, objectively, we know for a fact that the federal Liberal government has failed on screening in many different regards. I mean, the Auditor General released a damning report earlier this year just showing the rampant fraud and failure to screen in Canada's foreign student visa issuance system. I didn't really see a lot of pushback across the political spectrum that this was somehow acceptable. I think that there was general acceptance that this was really bad. But that reform or fixing that problem, I don't see a lot of action on it. I mean, the federal Liberals have failed to respond to the fact that there were several hundred cases that were flagged of fraud, and then they did nothing about it. There was really no consequence. So that's problematic. We've also raised issues, for example, of the Liberal government failing to deport or detect senior officials with the murderous Iranian regime, people who come to Canada, slip through the cracks because of the government's failure to screen properly, and then put the lives of law-abiding Canadians, particularly the Persian community in Canada, at risk. So failure to screen is something that is objectively happening in the federal government. It's happened for years, and Conservatives are pushing with common sense solutions to address those issues.
I see no more reporters on Zoom. That puts an end to this press conference. Thank you very much, Madame Rempel Garner. Merci beaucoup à tous. Bonne journée.